Hey, folks, this is Lonzo, the godfather of West Coast hip hop and the president of the Compton Entertainment Chamber of Commerce. Today, I'm starting something new today, folks. I'm starting something new. For the last maybe a couple years now, I've been seeing this brother at various events that I've attended. And every time he opens his mouth, I learn something new about Compton. Last week, we had a sit-down meeting, and I asked him if he was willing to share his information about Compton with the people of Compton and around the world on a more consistent basis. So today is our first episode of the Compton history brought to you by Robert Johnson. Now, if you don't know who Robert Johnson is, you might want to know Robert Johnson. Robert Johnson is a brother from the community. He's an author. He's a best-selling author. He's a founding member of the 125 Historical Society. He is a consultant to all type of documentaries and movies. He is a founding member of the Coalition Against Police Brutality. He's also a former member of the Black Panthers. Now, I can go, this brother's bio is very deep. We're going to touch on more of it as we do this interview, but Robert has agreed to come on the show about maybe once a week and spend some time with you so we can share some information about the city of Compton. And like I said before, every time he speaks, I learn something different about Compton. Today, we're going to start with the beginning, okay? Robert, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great, Lonzo. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, Doc. I'm glad you came on the show today. I'm trying to understand the origins of Compton, something you explained to us the other day. Could you give our audience a brief understanding of the origin of Compton and how it got started?
Oh, we're going to go all the way back then.
We're going to start to the beginning.
Well, let's do this. There's a Spanish land grant that's given to Jose Dominguez. Jose Dominguez was one of the original, what they used to call leather jackets or conquistadors, who explored what they called Alta California at that time. Keep in mind that the Spanish had already been in what we now call Mexico for a couple of generations. So they were recruiting people who lived in Sinaloa, places like that, which were, how would you say, Black communities for the most part.
Okay.
Keep in mind that at one time, there were more enslaved Africans in Mexico City than they were actually Spaniards.
Huh?
Okay. Keep that in mind.
Okay.
And then flip this, because, you know, our story is not one of just about slavery, okay? But enslaved Africans in Mexico City, the first slave revolt in what's now known as Mexico happened in 1519. Okay. You know, we look at 1619 as the beginning of African enslavement in North America. So a full 100 years earlier. I want you to think about this. I want your audience to think about this also. When we talk about the Spanish conquistadors and the Spanish conquest in the Americas, we have to ask ourselves a question. Who were the Spanish? For almost 1,000 years, southern Spain was part of an African empire that stretched from Ghana to southern Spain. You know, we talked about the Moors.
Right.
Over the almost 800 years that they were in southern Spain, you had different groups that came into southern Spain, and mainly those groups came in from Africa. Okay, that empire that I'm talking about that stretched from Ghana to southern Spain, the capital was Marrakesh. So obviously you had a lot of African influence in Spain. 1492, Queen Isabella and her husband Ferdinand are able to push the Moors it's another word for the Africans, out of southern Spain. Well, they actually took them out of power. These were the Spanish who were not under Moorish rule. All right, they were basically from Madrid. So the whole El Cid thing. Anyway, um, right when Christopher Columbus is talking about going to the New World,
Okay.
this is the very same time when you have a lot of Muslims, African Muslims, Muslims from North Africa and the Middle East, who were being dispossessed of the land that they owned in Spain. Okay, they were losing their land. So the offspring who would have ordinarily inherited that land, they were eager to find new lands in which to live on.
Okay.
So you had Muslims and Jews who were being expelled out of Spain. Naturally, they started, they wanted to participate in the voyages of exploration. To give you a little fact, a little factoid. There were three ships, right? Santa Maria. You remember the three special ships that Christopher Columbus was on?
Okay.
The Nina was actually christened this, I believe it was the San Clara or something like that. Anyway, the Nina belonged to a group of a family of navigators. These were men of African descent, okay, who lived in the Canary Islands. They actually donated that ship to the expedition.
Okay.
Their offspring, Pedro Nina, was the first to see land, even though it was the Bahamas, but he was the first to see it. But these were, you know, if you ever read Christopher Columbus's diaries, you'll find that he basically talked to these African navigators off the coast of West Africa to find out where he was going. And one of the things they told him was he had to change the rigging on his vessel in order to catch the wind or he would be becalmed. So, you know, if they knew these things, that meant that they've made that journey themselves. Okay, they weren't telling him this out of theory, they were telling him this out of experience. So you have a lot of people who talk about the African presence in the Americas before Columbus.
Okay.
Columbus provides us with information that really backs that theory. Okay, of course we have the Mayan heads that you see in the Yucatan that look like African heads,
Right.
and it's a lot of people believe that there had been trading going on from West Africa and the Yucatan for quite some time before Columbus was even born. So anyway, so we shouldn't be surprised when we hear that there was a huge African presence in what we now know as Mexico. Most of these people, like I said, you had a large enslaved population, but the Spanish who were there were also, many of them were also Moors, okay, who came with the Spanish conqueror. So we were on both sides. We weren't only the victims of colonization. Sometimes we were also the colonizers.
Interesting.
So that's something we have to think about. So anyway, to get to your question, Jose Dominguez, one of the early explorers, I want you to keep in mind, these soldiers did not get paid regularly. It wasn't like, they were getting paid every week or every month, sometimes even once a year, and they had to provide their own uniforms, firearms, and things of that nature. So at the end, when they decided to retire, the Crown decided to give land to these soldiers. Because one, that's what the soldiers would like. They wanted land so that they could, that they could cultivate and pass on to their heirs. But also, the Spanish government realized that in the northern part of California, you had the Russians, think of Russian River, that area. and you had the British. The Russians, they were up there, they were fur trappers. So the Spanish were afraid that they would lose claim to California. So they wanted to settle it. So the soldiers who had been on the exploration journeys, thinking in particular 1769, which was the first overland journey through what we now call Southern California. They decided to give these people land as they retired. So Jose Dominguez, he was an older soldier. He was living in San Juan Capistrano. So he got what we now know as the Dominguez land grant. It was the second land grant that was given, but it was the first one that was developed. Okay. Jose Dominguez dies before he actually settles that land. He passes it on to his nephew, who was also in the army, Cristobal. Cristobal Dominguez is also a soldier, and he had taken care of his uncle down in San Juan Capistrano. Anyway, before he can actually take possession of the land, Cristobal dies.
Okay.
So the land goes to his eldest son, Manuel Dominguez. Manuel Dominguez brings the family up from San Juan Capistrano to Los Angeles, houses the women there while the sons go and build an adobe. Now, if you're going east on the 91 freeway and you get to Alameda, get off at Alameda and go south, make a right turn, go south. And within about quarter of a mile or so, there's an entrance to the Dominguez adobe. I know that they do tours on Wednesdays, but you would have to check with them. But you should really take a tour. Your audience members should really go there and take a tour. It's very enlightening. Anyway, Manuel Dominguez and his family inherit their father's land grant. Now, keep in mind, this land grant stretches from roughly what is Rosecrans Boulevard today to Palos Verdes. I'm talking about including Palos Verdes, from the Los Angeles River all the way to Redondo. That's how large that land grant was. Well, in the 1850s, this is after the American conquest, where the Americans were trying to get everybody who was already there to prove they own the land. The Dominguez family granted as a wedding gift 4,600 acres to Manuel Dominguez's favorite niece, who had gotten married. This is in the 1850s. She became a Ferrer. Anyway, she borrowed $1,000 against that land. In those days, when you borrowed money, you put your deed up to back it. So she put the deed up. She didn't pay back the $1,000. So the land went to auction, 4,600 acres on the northeast part of the land grant. Two investors, Temple and Gibson, had bought the land at the auction. So they wanted to set up town sites. They wanted to resell the land for more money, of course. They were investors. You're familiar with where Park Village is, right?
Right.
Okay. Harmon was the family that first bought that land. And they were there even before G.D. Compton got on the scene. So the investors were already trying to sell land as soon as they got it. But what happened was G.D. Compton, who was the leader of a group of Methodist it was a Methodist agricultural collective. Most of them had come out west to be 49ers to dig for gold, but they didn't get rich. But the majority of them were farmers by trade.
Okay.
So they were living in Stockton, California, when they found out that this land was for sale. So basically, sight unseen, 30 families bought that 4,600 acres. They divided it up between 40 and 80 acres apiece. And they began the trek to come from Stockton to what is now Compton.
Okay.
Unfortunately for them, they came in the winter. Okay. So when they get there, they get to Compton in December. I believe it was December 1867. And it's raining cats and dogs. They set up their little shelters and everything, but they quickly get flooded out. People there, those 30 families are pretty pissed because if you think of that time, there are no stores.
Right.
There's not even a lot of wood. I mean, it's a lot of sagebrush. You can't get lumber until you go to the foothills towards Pasadena.
Okay.
One general store in Los Angeles, which is a day's walk from where they are in Compton, or what will be Compton. And then another general store in Wilmington, that's another day's walk. So they're sitting there, they're wet, they're cold, they're hungry, and they're looking at G.D. Compton, and they're not thinking Griffith Dickinson, okay? They're putting other words in there. But G.D. Compton relies on their religious upbringing and says, just pray. And if we stand together in unity, we'll get through this. So what they did was they packed up and they fell back towards what's now Central and Alondra.
Okay.
And the reason they did that, if you ever notice, Central and Alondra is high ground.
Okay.
Okay. So they sat there and they waited for the waters to recede, which they eventually did. Some of us who lived in Compton a long time realized before they put in all the drainage, all the drainage ditches and everything, the Compton used to flood all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. Every time it rained real good, you were at least ankle deep in some water. So anyway, the waters recede. And I want you to think about this. Most of these farmers had come from like the plains area. And if you know anything about people who farmed on the plains, it's that dirt is real, just real tough to dig up. Okay. They had to come up with with ways to plow the land because it was just hard, They get to Compton and the land plows very easily. Those of us who lived in Compton realize how rich the soil is.
Okay.
So these people, they get back, they plant their crops. And in the very first harvest, because their harvest is so abundant, because the land is so fertile, because of eons worth of flooding, it's just like the Nile River.
Okay.
You know how the Nile would bring that topsoil and it would flood once a year and the farmers say, hey, we could grow. That's what would have been happening with the Los Angeles River and the Compton area for quite some time. Okay. Which was a little different from Watts, because Watts for some reason had a lot of stones. It had rocky soil. Okay. Compton didn't. So the majority of these farmers had such a bountiful harvest that the majority of them were able to pay off their mortgages with the very first harvest.
Wow.
If you ever get a chance to look at, the LA County Fair.
Okay.
From the turn of the last century up, you'll always see Compton winning for prize produce, also for cattle, things like that, but basically a lot for produce. There's a picture of the Mayo farm with these giant squash and pumpkins. I mean, the size of a small child. Okay. The one of the main later on, one of the main agricultural exports was sugar beets.
Okay.
You know, sugar beets. Compton was an agricultural powerhouse. So anyway, this is how Compton is formed, based on, you know, they bought the auction land. That's when Compton first comes into existence. It's not until 1888 that Compton incorporates as a city.
Okay.
Mainly because these farmers didn't see a need. They didn't want to pay taxes. They didn't want to have to pay taxes for roads and things like that, because at that time they didn't see a need for it.
Okay.
But as the city was beginning to grow, and so was the agricultural community, you needed roads. You know, you needed schools. You needed these things. So Compton actually reincorporates, I think around 1909. And the county says, no, you're fine. You already incorporated in 1888. So that makes Compton one of the earliest cities to incorporate in this area. Okay. There was no Carson. There was no Long Beach. No Paramount or Clearwater at that time.
Oh, wait, let's get this perfect. Compton was the first of all of that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay. Compton was, I want you to think about this. And I think I might have mentioned before, I always compare Compton to Haiti. Okay.
Okay.
Haiti was the richest colony that the French had. Okay. And you know, it produced a lot of money for the wealthy planters. They were slave owners. As we all know, there was a slave revolt around about 1809, and they threw the enslavers and the colonizers out of what's now Haiti. Haiti went from being the wealthiest colony in the French Empire. Today, it's the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere. Haiti had been paying reparations. I'm sorry, say that again.
If I can't make the money, can't nobody make no money.
That's it. Okay. They had Haiti paying reparations back to France and England, you know, for decades. So that's why, you know, there's no accident that Haiti is where it's at. Compton was the jewel on the southern end of Central Avenue. Okay. Compton, after World War II, okay, because before World War II, this whole area was basically agricultural.
Okay.
There was this really amazing woman, Velma Grant. Velma Grant she was in real estate. She became a developer out of necessity. The World War II was about to come to an end, and the government had already announced the GI Bill. The GI Bill did two great things. One, it provided education for the soldiers returning home, and it provided an ability to buy your own home. Okay. And that was true for Black veterans in California as well as white ones. And the reason I say in California is because I want people to understand that when FDR was president and we were getting things like Social Security and unemployment insurance and such, FDR had to cut a deal with the Southern Democrats who were segregationists in order to get these bills passed. So if you lived in the South, you didn't have access to the GI Bill the way a Black man would have had access to the GI Bill in California. Because the compromise that FDR made was that in order to get those Southern Democrats to vote, was that these programs be administered by state instead of by the federal government. and those states were Jim Crow states.
Okay.
So if you were a veteran going home to Georgia, you ain't buying no house on the GI Bill. Okay, you're not going to get educated on the GI Bill. But if you were in California, it was different. Now think about this. Just before World War II starts, matter of fact, that June, A. Philip Randolph, Walter White from the NAACP, and others were planning a march on Washington, okay, against segregation and job discrimination. FDR had been sitting up here trying to develop an international coalition against Germany and condemning Germany for how they're treating the Jews. Well, of course, Hitler and FDR were going back and forth. And one of the things that Hitler pointed out was that the laws that we have for the Jews here in Germany, we got those laws from your Jim Crow laws in America. Kind of caught him in a little hypocrisy. So the last thing that FDR wanted was a bunch of Negroes showing up in D.C. saying put an end to Jim Crow. Okay. That would put him on Front Street as a hypocrite.
Right.
So he decided he said, look, I'll make a deal. If you call off this march, what I'll do is I will sign an executive order to end discrimination in any company that has a federal contract. Man, that was like ringing the dinner bell.
Wow.
I mean, can you imagine that brother down there and you're down in buttfuck Mississippi behind a plow or something, you know that you cannot make the same amount of money as any white man. I mean, you just can't. No matter what you do, you are not going to make that same money. So you working 2 and 3 jobs just to keep your family afloat. Okay.
So let me say something right quick.
You know what? Go ahead.
That's why so many black folks from down south migrated to the West Coast to get them jobs with Douglas and Todd Shipyard and Douglas Aircraft. Okay. And now you can't discriminate no more.
Okay. Well, listen, and I say this. It's not like they can't discriminate, but there's legal recourse if they do.
Okay.
They still gonna call you nigger and do all these because that's who they are.
Okay.
But for the first time, it's illegal. Okay. So because they had companies that had federal dollars down in Alabama, places like that. Okay. All right. But these brothers said, look, I'm getting out of here. I can make a living wage. Okay. And that's what happened. That's what starts the second Great Migration.
Okay.
Now, when we think about the Great Migration,
Take your time.
When we get the Great Migration, that's and it's almost exclusively people working in these defense industries. Okay. Most of the time we hear about people moving up, to the Chicago area or on the East Coast. But in Louisiana, Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, people came west.
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of us can look back at our families and say, okay, who got here and realize that those family roots were from one of those other states.
Yep.
My family came up from Louisiana, from New Orleans.
Yep.
Okay. My father's side, they basically had roots in Georgia, but they had moved earlier on to Idaho. This was during the 1910s. so they could work on the railroad. But my grandfather on my mother's side was a member of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. Okay, so he was a railroad man, and so he wanted his family. And you know, I asked my grandfather because you know my grandfather loved New Orleans, and I would say, well, you love New Orleans so much, why did you move? And he just straight told me, I did not want my children to live under Jim Crow. And I think that was the motivation for many people, including the jobs. Okay, the ability to be able to support your family and buy a home.
I got a dumb question.
Go ahead.
It could be a dumb question in some cases, but I got to ask this question, and I don't really know. I know the term Willie Lynch. Okay, lynching, the whole 9 yards, and he was an actual slave owner. Was Jim Crow an actual slave owner as well?
Oh no, Jim Crow was it was a vaudeville like clown show.
Okay,
it came out of vaudeville. Jim Crow was a character. Okay. So yeah, if we Google Jim Crow, you'll see that they'll probably show you a picture, and it's a stereotypical with the big red lips, the eyes popping out.
Okay.
And just lazy character. Okay. So Jim Crow segregation, you know, one of the things my grandfather said was, like I said, he didn't want to raise his family under Jim Crow, but he was surprised to find out that James Crow Esquire lived up north.
Okay.
In Los Angeles.
Okay.
And I'm gonna give you an example of that. You get off the train, you come downtown, and you go over to the Biltmore in the morning for breakfast.
Okay.
Everything's cool. The manager's there, and you get breakfast. You decide to come back for dinner, and they have a change of managers, right? Shift change.
Okay.
All right. Now, you already ate there for breakfast, but now you're coming in there for dinner, and they won't serve you. Because the manager there is different. So the difference was, you know, in the South, you had signs, you knew exactly what was what.
Okay.
When you came here, it was a little fuzzier, put it that way.
Okay.
You weren't quite sure if you were going to get served or not. So a lot of people just avoided it. Okay. So it was an uneven type of segregation.
Interesting.
Anyway, back to Velma Grant.
Go ahead.
Velma Grant, this is like in the mid 1940s. Velma Grant buys some of the, you guys, you know, you're familiar with Cressy Park.
Yeah.
So the Cressy family owned a lot of land all the way back towards north of 135th Street.
Okay.
She bought 190 acres, and she got Paul Williams, the great architect, to design these homes. Paul Williams had written 2 books during World War II on building smaller homes because, you know, as some of us know, Paul Williams was involved with building the houses to the stars. So he was building these big mansions and large commercial buildings. But he also had expertise in smaller homes. And so he wrote these 2 books, and Velma Grant actually read them. So she contacted him and told him what she wanted to do. Keep in mind, this is during a time of racial restrictions. They had the restricted covenants, which kept Black people from buying homes wherever they wanted. You could only buy in a certain area that allowed Black people to own property. And then once you bought it, you were redlined by the bank. Okay, so the bank wouldn't lend you money to upgrade your property.
Okay.
If you were a Black man and you tried to buy, say, a home in a white area, well, the bank just wouldn't lend to. So you were kind of stuck in a certain area. All right, this is where Black people lived, and that was it. So this is racial covenant. So you couldn't live in Compton, for instance. You couldn't live in Inglewood or Southgate. Okay. So that meant that you could not buy new housing stock. You were buying, if you bought a house, it was an older home.
Okay.
What they call now a fixer-upper.
Okay.
She decided she was going to build brand new homes for these returning Black veterans. So let's see. I'm sure many in your audience are familiar where Enterprise Park is, right?
Yeah.
You know where Enterprise Park is.
Very much so.
Sanford, yeah, and then Sanford Street.
Yeah.
Okay, you know where Sanford is off of El Segundo.
Okay.
That area is actually called George Washington Carver Manor. That's where she built her homes. Those homes in there were designed by Paul Williams. Go down Sanford sometimes and look at the home, the quality of those homes versus the surrounding area.
Yes, sir.
You're familiar.
Homes over there. Yes, I had a friend over there.
Okay. We were over there at Eve's After Dark. Right across the street. Okay. You made Eve's After Dark famous. But right across the street, Alonzo, she built that shopping center.
Okay.
Okay. So this Black woman in the mid-40s builds a whole neighborhood. Matter of fact, she started selling her homes, I believe it was in 47, September 47. She sells over 110 homes on the very first day that she opens.
Wow.
So she goes back to the bank and gets some more money and builds phase 2.
Okay.
By the mid-1960s, by the mid-1950s, there are over 350 Black families living on the northwest border of the city of Compton.
In LA County.
In Willowbrook.
Right.
Okay, so they're right on that border because 135th is like the border.
Right.
Okay. And the back end of Culver Manor stops at 135th Street.
Okay.
There was actually, because the Compton residents were so upset with all those Negroes there that they had a movement called Keep the Negroes, and trust me, brother, they didn't use the word Negroes, north of 135th Street.
Okay.
So that was the first area where you saw Black home on the border of the city.
Okay.
I'm getting a little feedback.
Are you? Ain't nothing changed.
Okay. I was getting a little feedback. It stopped now.
Okay.
Anyway, that was about the beginning of Black people coming into the west side of Compton.
Okay. Gotcha.
I have some friends who went to Centennial High School. Matter of fact, my aunt went to Centennial High School. People in Compton were so, excuse me, I thought I'd turn this thing off. People were so worried about the Black student in that area going to Compton High that they actually built Centennial High School to capture the Black population, student population,
okay,
to keep them out of Compton High.
Wow.
Okay, my aunt graduated from Centennial in '62. Okay, and they were trying, like I said, of course, it didn't work. By the mid '60s, you had a significant student body at Compton High School, and I think we all know their answer to that, as they saw that, was they built Dominguez in the late '50s.
Okay,
and Dominguez High School was so far east, it's actually on the other side of the river, in Paramount.
Right.
Okay, and that's where as you got to where most of the white students kind of fled to.
Okay.
By the mid 60s, Compton was basically divided. West side was black, east side was white.
Mm.
So I'm going to stop there and see, do you have any questions so far?
You know what, Doc? You're answering a lot of questions because I grew up on the other side of Avalon in the same basic area, but it was same LA County, but everything we did was done in Compton. Paid the water bill, the light bill, the phone bill, went to school in Compton, but technically I did not live in Compton. Although my birth certificate, I was born in Compton. I lived on Magnolia, okay, in Compton, off of Compton Boulevard. And because the houses, I guess my dad was tired of renting, he decided to buy a house in that same basic area, just a little to the west of Avalon. And now it makes sense because I did not go into the Enterprise Park area. I always cut through Enterprise going home from Centennial, but I never spent much time in Enterprise Park. And one day I had to take a buddy of mine home. This later on after I got out of school. I'm like, what? How did this place get away from us? Okay, because it's totally different from any place else around there. Now the houses between El Segundo and 132nd, all that area is very nice. Okay, it's very nice. All the way to 135th is very nice. But that particular area right around Enterprise Park is a little bit different. Now you explain that to me. I appreciate that. I learned something today.
Right on. Well, there were other black builders that had come in and built tracks also because they saw the success of Velma Grant. So, keep in mind it was, it brought the community because all that had been agricultural. Okay. Like where Centennial was, that they were stables there for horses and such.
Okay.
But the area was changing rapidly. By the early 60s, like I said, West Compton was black, East Compton was white. You had there were some, you're always going to have a mixed bag of everything. You got some people, white folks there that wanted just to be good neighbors and everything to be cool. You had other people who were just hating Negroes straight out. And that went from your neighbor to the person who owned a store to some of these school teachers.
Okay.
There's some people who came up in Compton schools during that time that could tell you some horror stories. I knew at General Rosecrans, for instance, Miss Weber King she would throw things at the students, staplers or shoe, whatever, just the idea they were not interested in educating any black children. So that was a struggle in the beginning. And the reason I say that is not to be controversial, but to show you the change. You start off in the early 60s. Like I said, you have some people who are cool, but here's the big problem. The realtors saw what was happening on the west side of Compton.
Okay.
Racial covenants, had been ruled illegal, and black people were beginning to buy houses in Compton. Are you familiar with the term blockbusting?
Yes, sir.
Okay, just for your audience, I'll
you.
just kind of just give a quick example. Blockbusting is basically when you take a white homeowner, for instance, he's living in his community, and a realtor shows up and says, "Look here, Bob, the Negroes are coming. Now, you're going to want to sell your house. You might not want to do it now, but I'm telling you, I can get you a great price now. 6 months from now, you're going to want to sell, but I'm not going to be able to get you the price that I can get you today."
Okay.
So I'll tell you what, list your house with me. Here you go. Sign right here, press hard, 5 copies. Then that agent goes into the black community and he says, Alonzo, I got a willing seller. Come take a look at the house. And you do that through a community. And what you're doing is you're selling based on fear. So what happened was whole neighborhoods would turn from majority white to majority black within weeks.
Wow.
That scared the hell out of the other white homeowners.
He knew they
black people.
He wouldn't got him.
Yeah, well, see, black for years, you had that pent up need for quality housing,
right?
And now the gates have been opened, and there were people willing to take advantage of those people who wanted that housing.
Okay.
So, when black folks were getting the houses, white folks were leaving. You had that white flight.
Right.
Okay. They initiated white flight. I'm talking about the realtors and the bankers, because they were using fear tactics. They were making money hand over fist. I mean, if a whole neighborhood flips, that means how many houses were sold?
Right.
You had realtors selling, 25, 30 houses, a month, if not more. So they were lining their pockets real tough. The bankers were making out like fat rats in a cheese factory, because one of the things they were doing was they were doing two things. They inflated the price of the house, so the black people moving in were buying houses at a higher price than normal. Okay.
Okay.
And the second thing they were doing was they were selling predatory loans. Because a lot of the black folks who were moving, this was moving into Compton, this was their first purchase.
Okay.
They're relying on their bank to help them, and their bank puts them into this predatory loan. And what I meant by that is, it's like, oh yeah, here you go. We got this easy credit for you, and we'll keep your payment low. And in 10 years, there's a balloon payment.
Okay.
But we got you in the house.
Okay.
So, like I said, whole neighborhoods, bam, each month. White folks in East Compton, man, they are freaking the fuck out. Okay.
Here they come.
Some people, and then think about this. They were older people who were just too old. They couldn't sell. They couldn't move. So there was, some people in certain neighborhoods, I know in mine, we had old white people who were just scared to death. Now they're surrounded by Negroes, and they weren't happy. I actually, when I was about 7 or 8 years old, one of these old cats pulled a gun on me because he thought I'd run through his house or something. And I'm just walking down the street. I'm on my way to the dairy on Rosecrans. Okay. And he comes running up on me with this pistol in his hand, screaming at me. And his wife was right behind him trying to, because he was a very, elderly man. She trying to stop him. That's not him. That wasn't him. I'm 7, 8 years old. Okay. So that just shows you how scared a lot of these people, the fear factor.
Okay.
You see, you could have, without the real estate tactic of blockbusting and these predatory loans, you probably could have ended up Compton being a progressive, integrated community.
Okay.
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 That could have happened. But instead, when you're working with fear, especially fear of the other, that ends up taking hold in the city of Compton.
Okay.
All right. There was an interview with Kevin Costner.
Okay.
Where he talked about because he was living in Victory Park.
Okay.
They changed it to Park Village. Victory Park was started out as defense housing. Okay. It was a government project housing.
Okay.
Okay. If you ever noticed, the government project housings that were set up in white communities always look like regular housing, but the ones that were set up in the black community are made out of cinder block and such.
Okay.
I know for a fact because before my family moved to Compton, we lived in Nickerson.
Okay.
Okay. And those houses were built out of cinder block.
Okay.
So, but if you look at, you know, in other areas where they had defense housing, they look like regular housing. As a matter of fact, some of them are still in use, like in Inglewood, Holly Knolls, that was a defense housing, you
Okay.
know, up on Crenshaw. Okay. A lot of those apartment buildings that they have were started off as defense housing.
Hmm. Didn't know that.
Okay. Yeah. So you know, you would never decide to move into Nickerson Gardens as you know as an apartment building.
Right. Right.
Okay. They set it up differently.
Okay.
So anyway, let me get off that. But we go into Compton. Keep in mind when I talk to you about the predatory lending, because during that time you have black businessmen who are coming down Central Avenue.
Okay.
You know, Dudos.
Right.
Uh, what's the brother's name?
Woodley.
Lewis.
Woodley
Woodley
Lewis.
Lewis. He sets up a bowling alley on the west side. You know, we were not. There was another bowling alley in Compton, up on Rosecrans over there by Luthers Park.
Okay.
Okay, Luthers Park got built in '61, but there was a bowling alley up there where there's some right across the street from Luthers Park on Rosecrans. There's some apartment buildings now.
Okay.
That's where that bowling alley used to be.
Okay.
The owners, now this was the rumor, the owners burnt it down because they didn't want no Negroes to get it, because they wanted to pull out, because they wouldn't serve you. All right, you went to that bowling alley, you were black, they didn't serve you.
This is the '60s.
Yes, sir.
Wow.
Okay. So you know, and that went on into the '70s. They were burning crosses in East Compton in '74.
What?
Okay. So yeah, this is East Compton.
I ain't never heard that.
Right? Yeah. Check that out, man. It was like the Sentinel and other newspaper about '74. They were, because as black people started moving into East Compton, all right, you had that opposition.
Okay.
All right, they had already said, okay, they gave up Compton High. They didn't want to give up Dominguez also.
Okay.
So as you had black people moving in the '70s in the East Compton, there's a story that I write about Dr. Ross Miller, who wanted to buy a house in East Compton back in '64.
Okay.
He's a doctor. He's over at Dominguez Valley Hospital. He's head of the ER and he's had a surgery over there, right?
Okay.
He sees a house he wants. I think it was on Poncetta. And everything's cool until he shows up to meet the owner to sell. The owner said, I ain't selling to you. Dr. Miller had to get one of his white colleagues to buy the house and then quick claim the deed over to him.
Wow.
Okay. That's how it was going there.
Okay.
So understand, the NAACP in Compton was working overtime. All right. And the reason I mention the NAACP in Compton is because, you know, Dollar Hyde, Cade, you know, all the notables, matter of fact, all the first mayors, black mayors of Compton, they all come out of the Compton NAACP. Maxie Filer, he was a huge presence in the NAACP, and they were fighting for equal housing. See, people came to Compton for two reasons: for the good housing and for the good schools. Okay. Compton organized. Well, Compton High was organized in the 1890s. Okay. At one time, it was the only high school in the area.
Wow.
So people from other areas, if they went to school, because usually you only went to school to the 9th grade, but you could come to Compton and you could go to school at an accredited high school to the 12th grade. You see, USC Well, I'll put it this way. Compton, G.D. Compton, was one of the founders of USC.
Now, you know what? We got about 5 minutes left. We got a lot to talk
Okay.
about. Some of this stuff I want to save for
Yes,
the
sir.
next show, okay? I want to save some of this for the next show. But when I post this, people are going to be curious to figure out the connection between Compton and USC. There is a connection. We're gonna get into that, but we got 4.5 minutes left. I want you to go back to a minute and tell us how the Compton ground was so fertile, why it was so fertile, and why we got these good water wells.
Well, that was another thing. I mean, think of yourself as a farmer back in these times. You're in the 1860s, you're a farmer. You know, it's like irrigation is an issue. All right. You got to dig irrigation ditches and stuff like that because you don't have, running water. In Compton, we have artesian wells. That's why we got a street called Artesian.
Oh,
all
shit.
right. I mean, not only
I didn't know that.
not only was the ground fertile because of eons of that fertile soil being brought by the floods.
Okay.
But we had the artesian wells. I mean, some places you go, you had to dig a ditch 20, 30, 40 feet to get a well.
Okay.
No, these fools, it's like you basically stuck a stick in the ground and water starts sprouting up.
Wow.
Okay. Because the water table here is high. We're next to the Los Angeles River.
Okay.
Okay. Well, we have a high water table.
Okay.
Boom, fresh water. To a farmer, I mean, you got to love that. You need water. So they were able to take advantage of these things. And that's why Compton was such a powerhouse during the agricultural days. That's why when you hear today, when people start talking about a food desert,
all right,
you got to say, man, that's crazy because, you can grow anything in Compton. Okay. I mean, a lot of folks might decide to try to grow some weed, but check this out.
Yeah, it's going to be good weed.
It'd be good weed, okay? But when I was a kid, man, in my backyard, we had banana trees, orange trees, tangerine, lemons, limes, apricots. My family, like I said, we had moved from Watts to Compton. I didn't know what a loquat was until I moved to Compton.
Man,
I had loquats in my backyard.
We had loquats in my neighborhood, but I was in the 3rd district seeing visiting my boy James Hayes. There's a loquat street on the street, on the doggone curb, full of loquats. I hadn't seen a loquat since I was a kid, man. Man,
and those were tasty.
Man, I love you.
We had avocado tree, we had a peach tree, all in my backyard.
You never see loquats in the store though. Is that for a reason? I don't know.
I tell you the truth, I don't know because I would look. I mean, sometimes you see it, and sometimes you see it at farmers markets.
Okay. I love it.
Yeah.
About a minute left, Doc. We're gonna keep it to an hour, so we got about a minute left. Let's put a bow right here. Start wrapping it up so we can come back some more of this good Compton history. Man, I love this right here, Doc. You got a minute? Go ahead.
Well, I just want you to know this. Compton has a lot of history. We had the first black mayor of a major municipality west of the Mississippi. Douglas F. Dollarhide was the son of an enslaved man. And he went one generation from his father being enslaved to Dollarhide becoming the first black mayor of a major municipality west of the Mississippi. Okay. The difference in the power behind him being mayor was that he just didn't become mayor by himself. He had a majority black city council and he had a majority black school board. Okay. And that scared the hell out of the white supremacists because believe me, they were, the newspapers, when Dollarhide won, they say Dollarhide wins Negro experiment in self-government.
All right.
Because think about it. In 1969, they didn't think a black man could quarterback a football team, let alone run a city.
All right, Doc, we're going to stop right there. You are live with Lonzo and my man Robert Johnson, a Compton historian who's dropped so much information on this right now. I got to stop him. Right now so we can come back next week and pick it where we left off at. Robert, thank you again. Folks, thank you for watching. If you learned something, next time you can give us a call if you got a question or get in the chat room. We'll be more than glad to respond to you. Robert, till next week, Doc. See you later.
All power to the people.
All right, power to the people. We out. Peace, y'all.